Hey guys, Dimension Master Studios here. How y'all doing? So, in case you guys don't know, 4 years ago we got the season finale for season 11, Awakenings. And just like a lot of things when it comes to season 11, this episode is pretty controversial when it comes to the fan base. But also, just like a lot of things when it comes to season 11, I personally really like this episode. In my opinion, Awakenings is one of the best episodes and finales that we have ever gotten when it comes to Ninjago. And in today's video, I want to talk about this episode and I want to explain why I really like it. So, let's get into this whole thing. So, for starters, the episode begins by picking up right where the previous episode ended, with Lloyd confronting the Ice Emperor and Lloyd trying to get Zane to remember who he is. However, before that happens, Lloyd and Nikita end up getting involved in an argument with each other, and this is actually one major positive when it comes to the episode, in my opinion. Lloyd and Nikita's characters are absolutely fantastic when it comes to this episode. All throughout the events of the Ice chapter, we saw this really big dynamic between Lloyd and Nikita, with the two of them learning to overcome their trust issues and see the good in the world again as a result of the two of them traveling together. And I feel like during this episode, we get a chance to see the culmination of that entire storyline. And when it comes to everything, it starts off during this moment with Akita getting angry at Lloyd, which makes perfect sense because during the opening of the episode, Lloyd said that the Ice Emperor was his friend, and from Akita's perspective, Lloyd, for basically no reason, is defending the Ice Emperor. And as the two of them were traveling together, Lloyd and Akita talked about trying to find a way to defeat the Ice Emperor. So again, from Akita's perspective, Lloyd, for basically no reason, is defending the Ice Emperor. And Akita getting mad makes perfect sense because she doesn't know that when it comes to the Ice Emperor, he and Zane are the exact same person, and Lloyd is trying to find a way to save Zane. So again, Akita getting mad at Lloyd makes a lot of sense. After this, Akita then goes to try and fight against the Ice Emperor. However, Lloyd stops Akita from doing that because he doesn't want either of his friends to get hurt. However, the Ice Emperor ends up intervening and he goes to fight against Lloyd and Akita. And when it comes to Lloyd, he goes to defend Akita from an ice blast from the Ice Emperor, thus kicking out the fight between Lloyd versus the Ice Emperor. And this right here is actually another major positive about this episode for me. The fight scenes during this episode are absolutely fantastic. For starters, we have Lloyd versus the Ice Emperor, and in my opinion, this fight scene is really good for a number of different reasons. For starters, the animation and fight choreography in this fight is absolutely fantastic. I especially really like the lighting inside of the Ice Emperor's throne room, and this scene visually looks absolutely fantastic. Additionally, this fight scene means a lot for the characters of Lloyd, the Ice Emperor, Zane, and Akita, but I'm going to get back to all that later on. After this, we have Kataru and Grimfax versus the Blizzard Samurai, and this fight scene is also pretty good in my opinion. And then we also have the Ninja versus Boreal, and this is another big fight scene that I really like when it comes to the episode for a couple of reasons. For starters, we have the ninja going up against a gigantic dragon, and in my opinion, that is just awesome. But also, when it comes to this fight scene, it actually relates into another major positive for this episode, and that is how this episode wraps up the storylines of the season. All throughout the events of the Ice chapter and during season 11 in general, we saw a lot of different storylines playing out over the course of the season. And when it comes to this episode, I feel like it honestly does a really great job at wrapping up a lot of these storylines in a pretty satisfying way. And when it comes to this fight scene of the Ninja versus Boreal, this fight scene acts as the conclusion to Nia and Kai's storylines for the Ice chapter, and in the case of Kai, his storyline for season 11 as a whole. Let's start off with Nia. When it came to Nia during the Ice chapter, something that we saw was her learning how to control snow and ice. And like I said during my big review of season 11, something that I really like about this is that during the Ice chapter, we constantly saw Nia struggling and failing at learning how to control snow and ice. However, Nia kept at it and she kept on trying. And this is something that I really liked because it showed us that when it came to Nia, her learning how to control snow and ice is something that she really wanted to do. And during the fight against Boreal, we see the culmination of the storyline with Nia using her powers to control some icicles, allowing her to crush Boreal underneath them. And in my opinion, this is a pretty satisfying conclusion to Nia's storyline because this shows that when it came to all of Nia's hard work and practice with her learning how to control snow and ice, in the end, it paid off. However, when it came to Nia crushing Boreal with the icicles, that wasn't enough, and he gets back up, and this leads us into the conclusion for Kai's storyline. Kai's storyline all throughout the events of Season 11 revolved around him and his relationship with his powers. During the Fire chapter, Kai felt useless in comparison to the rest of the team as a result of him losing his powers, because Kai felt like he couldn't do as much in order to help out the rest of the team without his powers. However, Kai ended up coming to the realization that even though he didn't have his powers, that didn't mean that he wasn't a hero and he could still help out. Then, during the Ice chapter, Kai realized that he can't always rely on his powers to get himself out of tough situations, and he needs to rely on himself. And all throughout Season 11, Kai constantly saw people who he cared about get put in danger in one way or another. And in this moment, it is happening again with the ninja. His friends and family are in danger, and after seeing this, and after going through everything else during Season 11, Kai has had enough. And during this fight scene, we saw Kai fully tapping back into his powers, and he was able to completely melt Boreal. And once again, I feel like this is another pretty satisfying conclusion when it comes to this episode. After this, we then cut back to Lloyd versus the Ice Emperor, and like I said, in my opinion, this fight scene is absolutely fantastic. However, there's one thing about this fight scene that I want to bring up, and that's Akita. During the fight scene, we don't really see Akita intervening in it that much, and in my opinion, this makes a lot of sense, and at the same time, I feel like this actually relates into Akita's storyline for the season. Like I said earlier when it came to Lloyd and Akita, the two of them had this storyline revolving around the two of them overcoming their trust issues and them learning to see the good in the world again. However, at the exact same time, during the events of the Ice chapter, we saw that Lloyd and Akita were both holding on to certain ideas, but during this episode, we actually see the two of them finally letting go of those ideas. And when it came to Akita, that idea was revenge. Something that we learned during the events of the Ice chapter was that Akita wanted to get revenge on Vex and the Ice Emperor for all the terrible stuff that they had done. However, during this episode, we actually don't see Akita getting revenge. And I feel like there's a reason why we don't see that. All throughout the fight scene, Lloyd was constantly trying to get Zane to remember who he was. And during the events of the Ice chapter, Lloyd was talking about trying to find Zane and rescue him. And I feel like during this fight scene, Akita was able to put two and two together, and she realized that Zane and the Ice Emperor were the same person. And I feel like Akita realized that if she were to battle against the Ice Emperor, then she would end up hurting Zane, which would end up hurting Lloyd. And remember, hurting Lloyd is something that Akita really doesn't want to do. And so as a result of Akita not fighting against the Ice Emperor, we actually see her letting go of the idea of revenge. And during this fight scene, I feel like Akita ended up realizing that when it came to this fight, it wasn't her fight, this was Lloyd's fight. And if she did end up taking revenge, then she would only hurt Lloyd in the process. And again, hurting Lloyd is something that Akita really doesn't want to do. In fact, when it comes to Akita, she only ends up intervening once during the fight, and that is towards the end of the fight, where she ends up sacrificing herself, giving Lloyd the chance to live on, which is the exact same thing that Kataru did for Akita back during the episode Last of the Formlings, which I think is an interesting detail. After that happens though, we then get the defeat of Vex and the Ice Emperor, and in my opinion, both of these defeats are handled really well. For starters, like I said earlier, when it came to Lloyd during his fight against the Ice Emperor, he was constantly trying to get Zane to remember who he was, with Lloyd putting his trust into Zane, and he was hoping that Zane would be able to remember who he was. And as we see with Lloyd putting his trust into Zane, we see that this did have a bit of an effect on him, given the fact that the Ice Emperor ends up hesitating after Lloyd is frozen. Not only that, but when it comes to Vex, when he tells the Ice Emperor to finish off Lloyd, the Ice Emperor doesn't do it, so Vex decides to do it himself. However, right before he does, Vex ends up talking to Lloyd, and in the process, Vex says the word protect. And this, combined with Lloyd putting his trust into Zane and Lloyd trying to get Zane to remember who he is, Zane ends up remembering everything. After hearing the word protect, Zane remembers that he was built to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and when it comes to Zane, he ends up remembering everything. And we end up getting this, in my opinion, pretty cool flashback sequence with Zane remembering a ton of stuff from season 11, and I think this scene is handled really well with the staticky visuals as well as also the music that's played. And eventually, after Zane remembers everything about who he was, he ends up turning on Vex and he ends up destroying the Scroll of Forbidden Spinjitzu, undoing everything that he did as the Ice Emperor, and bringing a conclusion to his storyline during the season. And in my opinion, when it comes to this, it ends up working really well as not only the conclusion to Zane's storyline, but at the same time, the defeat for the Ice Emperor, and also the defeat for Vex, with Vex essentially being the one responsible for his own downfall, with him saying the word protect. And something that we don't often see when it comes to Ninjago is villains being responsible for their own downfall, so I do think it's interesting that when it comes to Vex, like I said, he was essentially responsible for his own downfall. Plus, at the same time, when it comes to this whole situation, this ends up relating into Lloyd's storyline because, like I said, as a result of Lloyd putting his trust into Zane, the Ice Emperor was able to be defeated as a result of Zane remembering who he was. So overall, when it comes to the whole situation of Zane remembering who he is and Vex getting defeated, in my opinion, this whole situation is honestly handled really well. After this, we then cut to a few days later, where we get a chance to see the Neverrealm residents adjusting to life without the Ice Emperor, and we get a chance to see Vex's punishment with him getting banished. And in my opinion, this is the perfect punishment that Vex could have gotten, because it brings his entire storyline full circle. Remember, prior to the events of the Ice chapter starting, Vex went into self-exile because he believed that everyone hated him. This wasn't actually true though, and the only reason why Vex believed everyone hated him was because of all of his paranoia, anger, and fear towards the world. However, after Vex turned Zane into the Ice Emperor and he instilled that paranoia, anger, and fear into the world, Vex is once again going into exile, but not because he thinks everyone hates him. Vex is now going into exile because everyone does hate him. And this is something that I find to be pretty interesting. And it's that when it comes to Vex, he was responsible for himself going into exile both times, and both of those times related to people hating Vex. But remember, initially people didn't actually hate Vex, he only thought that they did, but now when it comes to Vex being exiled, everyone does hate him. And again, when it comes to this as a punishment for Vex, I honestly feel like this is the perfect punishment that he could have gotten, because again, this brings his entire storyline full circle. After this, the ninja then try to go home, however they're unable to because as it turns out, the traveler's tea that Cole brought to Sorla isn't able to get the ninja home. That is until Cole remembers something. Cole remembers the berry that Crag gave him back when the two of them first met each other, and as a result of that, we get the conclusion to Cole's storyline. Cole's storyline during the Ice chapter revolved around him trying to absolve himself of the guilt that he felt as a result of him losing the Traveler's Tea, and Cole wanted to do whatever he could to try and get more Traveler's Tea so he and the other ninja could end up going home. And as a result of Cole's friendship with Crag, Cole was able to get the ninja the stuff that they needed in order to make more Traveler's Tea so they could actually go home. And this is something that I do honestly really like. that when it came to Cole and Crag's friendship, it resulted in the ninja being able to go home. But at the same time, this one little thing that happened when Cole and Crag first met each other resulted in the ninja getting what they needed in order to go back home. Which again, this is something that I do honestly really like. And again, as a conclusion to Cole's storyline during the season, I feel like this honestly works really well. So after this, we then see the ninja going back home to Ninjago, and we get some nice moments of the ninja reuniting with Sensei Wu, and we also get a really nice moment of Zane and Pixel reuniting. We also get a nice moment of Crag giving Cole a giant hug right before he leaves. And then we get Lloyd and Akita, where right before Lloyd leaves, Akita gives him a kiss on the cheek. And in my opinion, this is the perfect way that Lloyd and Akita's Ice Chapter storyline could have ended. For starters, this scene, like a few others that we saw during Season 11, is meant to be a recreation of certain moments that we saw during Season 8. However, just like those other scenes, there are some differences compared to what we saw during Season 8. And this is meant to show that when it comes to the storyline that Lloyd and Akita are going through during Season 11, while there are some similarities to the storyline that Lloyd and Harumi went through during Season 8, there are some differences, meaning that these stories aren't the exact same. And when it comes to this moment here, it is no different. When it comes to this scene, it's obviously meant to be a recreation of the moment during the episode The Quiet One, where Harumi gave Lloyd a kiss on the cheek. However, like I said, there are some differences. There are some smaller ones, such as Lloyd's reaction as well as the camera angles in the scene. However, the big difference between this scene and the one during Season 8 is the reason why Lloyd is getting a kiss in the first place. When it came to Harumi during Season 8, the only reason why she gave Lloyd a kiss was to distract and manipulate him. The season made it very clear that when it came to Harumi, she didn't care about Lloyd and she only wanted him to suffer, and when it came to Harumi, she wanted Lloyd to gain feelings for her, also that way when she ultimately betrayed him, the betrayal would hurt even harder, and that is exactly what we saw during the events of Season 8. Meanwhile, when it comes to Akita, it is the exact opposite. Because when it comes to Akita, she genuinely cares about Lloyd and she likes him a lot, and like I said earlier, when it came to Akita, she really didn't want Lloyd to get hurt during the events of the Ice Chapter. And when it comes to Akita giving Lloyd a kiss on the cheek, she did it because, like I said, she genuinely cares about him and she likes him a lot. And that's something that I do like. However, that's not all, because I feel like this scene also ends up accomplishing two other big things at the exact same time. For starters, I feel like this scene does a really great job at showing us Lloyd and Akita's character development over the course of the season. Like I said earlier, when it came to Lloyd and Akita, we got a chance to see the two of them overcoming their trust issues and them learning to see the good in the world again. That was their entire storyline during the events of the Ice Chapter. Plus, at the same time, we also saw the two of them letting go of certain ideas that they had been holding on to during the events of the Ice Chapter. When it came to Akita, like I said earlier, she let go of the idea of revenge. Meanwhile, when it comes to Lloyd, though, I feel like during this moment, we get a chance to see him letting go of the idea that he had been holding on to. And the idea that Lloyd had been holding on to during the events of the Ice Chapter was him obsessing over his failures surrounding Harumi. When it came to Lloyd, all throughout the events of Season 11, we constantly saw him being haunted by his failures surrounding Harumi, as well as also Harumi's manipulations affecting Lloyd in one way or another, to the point that when it came to Lloyd, he wasn't sure who he could trust outside of members of the team. However, over the events of the Ice Chapter, as a result of Lloyd traveling with Akita, Lloyd ended up realizing that when it came to him constantly not trusting people, that wasn't going to get him anywhere, and at the same time, if he kept on holding on to those ideas, inevitably bad things were going to happen to him. And during the events of the Ice Chapter, we saw Lloyd putting his trust into people, and I feel like in this moment, we finally get a chance to see Lloyd letting go of his obsession surrounding his failures with Harumi, with Lloyd taking comfort in his loved ones and the people who care about him, with Lloyd knowing that there are people out there who can and want to help him, and Akita is one of those people. So again, when it comes to this scene, I feel like it does a really great job at showing us Lloyd Nikita's character development over the course of the season, with the two of them essentially being able to fully trust each other in this moment. Plus, like I said, Lloyd was also able to finally let go of his obsession surrounding his failures with Harumi. However, that's not all, because I feel like the scene also does something else really well. The other thing that I feel this scene does really well is showing us how close Lloyd and Nikita became over the course of the season. During the events of the Ice chapter, we saw Lloyd and Nikita traveling together, and it was pretty obvious based on their interactions and the way they talked to each other that the two of them cared about each other and had feelings for one another. And I feel like during this moment, we get a chance to see the full culmination of that. When it comes to Akita, with her giving Lloyd a kiss, this is meant to represent a symbol of her love and her feelings for Lloyd. And when it came to Lloyd, like I said earlier, this moment is meant to represent him taking comfort in his loved ones and the people who care about him, with Akita being one of those people. And I honestly feel like when it comes to this scene, it does a really great job at showing us so many different things at once. It gives us another nice recreation of a scene that we saw during the events of Season 8. The scene does a really great job at showing us Lloyd Nikita's character development over the course of the season. And finally, I feel like the scene does a really great job at showing us just how close Lloyd and Nikita became over the course of the season. After this, though, Lloyd does end up leaving. However, before the episode comes to an end, we end up getting some narration from Akita, and this entire ending scene is essentially meant to set up the idea of Akita returning. And this is something that I do really like. Even though Akita's Ice Chapter storyline came to an end during this season, this scene essentially sets up the idea of Akita returning and the idea that even though this one storyline for Akita is done, that doesn't mean that her story overall is done, and there are more stories that can be told with her character. And this is an idea that I do really like. And with any luck, given the stuff that's happened so far when it comes to Dragon's Rising, we finally get a chance to see Akita return after all this time. Not only that, but when it comes to this episode setting up the idea of Akita returning, she talks about the idea of seeing Lloyd again, setting up the idea that at some point in the future, we're finally going to get the chance to see Lloyd and Akita reunite with each other after all this time. And this is an idea that I do honestly really like, and I do hope that if we get a chance to see Akita make a return at some point during Dragon's Rising, we finally get a chance to see her and Lloyd together again. That is something that I, and I'm sure many other fans, would really like to see. And then the episode comes to an end with a shot of the sun, as Akita says that never is a very long time, and that is where the episode comes to an end. And overall, like I said, when it comes to Awakenings, I really like this episode. In my opinion, Awakenings is able to accomplish so many great things in just 11 minutes. With this episode having absolutely fantastic fight scenes, I feel like this episode does a really great job at wrapping up a lot of the major storylines for the Ice chapter, and in some cases Season 11 as a whole. The characters of Lloyd and Akita are both handled absolutely fantastically during this episode. I feel like Vex's defeat and punishment are handled really well when it comes to this episode. This episode, I think, does a great job at setting up the idea of Akita returning, and so much more. Overall, in my opinion, when it comes to Awakenings, this is my personal favorite Wild Rain finale that we have gotten, and at the same time, in my opinion, Awakenings is one of the best finale episodes that we have ever gotten when it comes to Ninjago. Overall, for me personally, I really like Awakenings, and at the same time, in my opinion, when it comes to Awakenings, this is the perfect ending that the Ice chapter and Season 11 as a whole could have gotten. I really like this episode. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. So tell me down below what do you guys think. Tell me, was there anything that I left out when it came to this episode? And at the same time, what do you guys like when it comes to Awakenings? Again, tell me down below and I hope you guys enjoy. Later guys, this is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.